Malathar the Unflinching was swift and brash, a blooded initiate of the warrior caste, and was currently doing his best to avoid having the flesh of his legs flayed by the claws of the creature crawling around in his lap. Next to him, one of the human biologists from the couple he had been hired to safeguard, a likely unnecessary precaution given the tameness of the reports for the jungle world they were arriving at, simply cooed, "Oh, look, he likes you." The persimmons were what humans called retired, but evidently, the typical human leisure activities of relaxing under UV-rich starlight and using sticks to propel small balls into holes across strangely denuded hills were not sufficient to entertain them. Instead, they had sought to begin cataloging one of the countless worlds that contained plentiful, if non-sentient, life. The two humans had not been alone when they first met the warrior. Stiff and formal introductions were made over the incessant, yapping and seemingly omnipresent racing around of a small, furred quadruped, a creature his studies on human culture and fauna identified as a dog, a common companion species for humans. Humans almost always had companion animals of some type or another. While he had heard some claim that humans were stronger than any other creature in the galaxy, in Malathar's eyes, their minuscule forms were clearly unsuited for feats of strength or toughness, and relying on another species to assist them did not improve the argument despite some saying that it was difficult to raise a companion creature. He had heard of one or two accounts of his own kind keeping a companion creature, not of their species, but it was rare to say the least. Still, Malathar was hardly willing to admit, either aloud or privately, that he believed humans to be anything other than feeble and underwhelming. To prove to himself that the accolades of humans were overblown, he acquired a youngling Nightfang, a carnivore from his own homeworld, renowned for its strength and speed. It had hatched only a week or two before, but its sharp claws, jutting canines, and bulbous head were already making a violent impression upon his more tender, less scaled appendages. Mrs. Persimmon had then made cooing noises more typically associated with entertaining and soothing infants of their own kind. Much to Malathar's confusion and mild dismay, the Nightfang responded to the sounds, curling and winding itself across his legs, leaving new gouges and cuts in its wake. The adolescent hunter craned its neck to allow the human to scratch between the large spines present there. Next to her, the human's own companion animal, which they had named Katie, sniffed curiously, let out a little bark of excitement, and made a pouncing motion toward the Nightfang. Malathar braced for bloodshed, but instead, the Nightfang bounded over and began wrestling with the small dog. To his surprise, it then turned and allowed itself to be chased as well. "See? They're bonding," said Mrs. Persimmon. Mr. Persimmon looked on with a tight-lipped smile, but when Malathar had spoken to him a few days later, he had expressed concern about acquiring a new companion animal. "I just don't know if I could do this again," he'd said to Malathi a few days later. "It's all well and good right now, but keeping pets is the easy part." Malathar had already lost count of the small wounds he'd received from his Nightfang, whom he had named Malatharterius, but whom Mrs. Persimmon had nicknamed Artie. Malathar could feel disbelief creeping into his voice as he told the elder biologist, "How in the name of the 5 moons is this easy?" He gestured toward a rucksack they had used the day before while cataloging plant species, which Katie had enthusiastically turned into a chew toy, dragging it, ripping it apart, and chewing the webbing until it was slimy and nearly unrecognizable. Mr. Persimmon chuckled and said, "Stuff like that can be replaced, but trust me, that's the easy part." Malathar the Unflinching was a little less brash and a little less swift as he chased behind Artie, trying to anticipate whether and where he would need to apply more neutralizing powder. The humans had done something called house training for Katie, teaching her to urinate and defecate outside so that the interior of the habitation module no longer smelled of slightly stale urea and sulfur compounds. There had still been a number of mishaps, including an unexpected and unwanted soiling of Malathar's ceremonial garb, which he kept neatly folded in a corner. However, now Katie would claw at the airlock when she needed to relieve herself and, apart from requiring extra vigilance near the module to avoid stepping in a defecation, accidents had almost entirely ceased. When he attempted to try the same for his own Nightfang, though Malathar found the process far more taxing, Artie was undergoing a period of maturation, marked by increased energy, aggression, an temporary yet exponential rise in the acid content of his excretions. Malathar's tall compound ears swiveled as he heard the sound he had been dreading, the gentle hiss of acid reacting with something. He raced over to find Artie squatting defiantly next to his ceremonial garb, a puddle of lumpy, fluorescent green excreta bubbling merrily on the metal flooring and oozing perilously close to the textiles. Screeching in alarm, he grabbed Artie, ignoring the wiggling snarls and attempted jabs from the creature's spines, and raced to the airlock door. He popped it open, tossed the night fang out, and hurried back to clean up the mess before it melted through the compartment flooring. Luckily, his garb remained undamaged, just barely. When he returned to the airlock to dispose of the neutralized droppings, he was startled to find Artie sitting there with a wriggling invertebrate clamped in his jaws, proudly displaying it like a child after their first successful hunt. Mrs. Persimmon had emerged from the tree line carrying a bundle of leaf clippings and made an excited noise. "Looks like he brought you something." Malathar groaned in frustration and said, "Just drop it." To his surprise, for once Artie listened. Unfortunately, Malathar had neglected to close the airlock door first, and the invertebrate scuttled inside. Malathar followed, determined to find and expel the intruder. Artie screeched in excitement and bounded further in, followed by Katie. The three creatures collided with objects and each other several times as they scrambled to catch the tiny, terrified quarry until it ran out, terrified, between Mrs. Persimmon's legs. He did his best to ignore the fact she was clutching her side from laughing so hard. Malathar the Unflinching was a little less brash and a little less swift, his mind racing as he tried to figure out the best angle of attack as he ran. A decade had passed without much fanfare, but the Persimmons had noted occasional traces of a large apex predator on the planet, despite most of the flora and fauna being benign herbivores or small carnivores. About half a solar cycle ago, they had begun baiting and setting up cameras to capture an image of the creature, but the results were always fleeting, blurry shots. The creature moved too swiftly and cautiously to be clearly captured. His hindgut had told Malathar at the time that actively attracting such a predator with bait would also bring it closer to their encampment. The humans insisted, however, and he calmed his concerns by thinking of it being instead an opportunity for combat. After all, he was a warrior, and the opportunity for physical battle against a truly worthy opponent was not one to shy away from. His people traditionally saw the warrior's path as striving and succeeding in conflict abstractly, but ever since Mr. Persimmon had introduced him to chess and soundly beaten him every time, Malathar had adjusted his interpretation of the warrior's philosophy to focus on physical combat only. Minutes earlier, a crashing in the brush had been followed by Mrs. Persimmon's scream. Artie had responded even faster than Malathar, streaking forward into the bushes. Malathar, loping behind, could hear the rustling crash of Artie's pursuit, the night fang's long legs allowing it to leap over fallen trees and evade venomous bramble vines. He also heard Mr. Persimmon shouting, "Delilah, where are you?" and the frenzied barking of Katie, who sounded further ahead than her owner. Artie's shrieking growl mingled with Katie's frantic snarls, sounds Malathar had never heard from the normally cheerful dog. Pushing forward, he emerged into a clearing. At its center lay a broad pile of brambles and leaves, apparently pulled together to form a nest. Sitting atop it was the apex predator they had sought, a massive shelled creature with snapping claws and mandibles that chittered and gurgled. A pair of venomous stingers arced up from behind it, striking toward but not quite hitting the dog and the night fang. In one of its foreclaws hung Mrs. Persimmon, her gray curls streaked with blood as she dangled unconscious from its grasp. The enormous creature hissed, and Malathar quickly unfurled and armed his rifle, bringing it to bear. He sighted the creature carefully, avoiding the captured human. For a moment, he aimed at its center mass but hesitated. He had only one shot, and he could not be certain how thick its shell might be. Instead, he quickly aimed for one of the exposed eye stalks and fired. The stalk exploded in a shower of purple gore, and the creature hissed and reeled, instinctively reaching for the injury and dropping Mrs. Persimmon roughly onto the ground. Immediately, Katie stood over her, barking and growling, while Artie leapt forward, snapping and shrieking. The Night Fang dodged the predator's attempts to strike with its stingers until the creature finally withdrew, crashing off into the brush. Behind him, Malithar heard Mr. Persimmon running up, wheezing and out of breath. The man stumbled forward and knelt beside his wife, clutching her hand. "Oh God, Delilah," he choked out, voice trembling. "Please wake up. Say something. Say anything." Malithar felt his own shoulders sag with relief as she coughed and gripped her husband's hand. "Don't worry, old coot," she rasped. "I'm still here." Mr. Persimmon laughed shakily. "God, Delilah, don't scare me like that. My old ticker's not going to last if you keep doing this." She smiled weakly and rubbed Katie's gray-tinged muzzle. The dog nuzzled her, licking her face. Malithar couldn't help the grin forming on his own face. A learned expression from his years with the humans. Artie returned, curling against Malithar's legs, but carefully avoiding puncturing him with its spines. Malithar glanced in the direction the predator had fled, then looked, down at the Night Fang. He marveled that both the creature and Katie had escaped injury. "How in the stars' names do you make sure they're okay?" he asked. "When they're willing to dive into danger like that?" Mr. Persimmon laughed. "You can't. You just have to hope for the best. Besides, like I told you before, keeping pets is the easy part." Malithar snorted in disagreement but said nothing, stepping forward to help support Mr. Persimmon as they headed back home. Malithar the Unflinching was a little less brash and a little less swift as he carefully steeped a cup of tea for Mrs. Persimmon. Her health had never fully recovered after the injury, especially as her leg had to be amputated below the knee due to the predator's claws. So far, the shot to its eye had apparently driven all curiosity and interest out of the predator. No trace of it had been captured on the cameras since. But that was far from Malithar's or Mr. Persimmon's mind now. Mr. Persimmon rarely left her side, staying near constantly. When she slept, he would trudge through the planet's jungle despite it being the rainy season, braving the swampy trails to collect blooming flowers he knew she enjoyed. Malithar often joined him, but recently he had asked to go alone, though Artie always accompanied him. Katie remained by Mrs. Persimmon's bed, her head perpetually nudged under the woman's hand. Her tail wagged whenever Mrs. Persimmon stirred, enough to feel the fur beneath her fingers and give a few gentle scratches. Malithar finished the tea and set the steaming cup by her bedside. Her breathing had grown shallow and quick. Despite his gentle calls, she did not awaken. Mr. Persimmon came in, shaking off his poncho and swapping out the small cup holding the previous bouquet with a fresh one. As he placed the flowers aside, he caught sight of her and sat heavily, letting out a deep sigh. Taking her hand in his, he whispered, "It's all right, Flower. You don't need to hold on for me. Go on. Be at peace. The good Lord's got a place set out for you." He turned to Malithar. "It won't be long now. I know she's grateful for all you've done for us." Malithar nodded silently and made for the door. He stepped outside, ignoring Mr. Persimmon's call behind him. "Hey, Malithar, wait, you should—" The airlock door shut, and he began running. He dashed through the trees and rain, focusing on the trail underfoot, trying to think of anything, to distract himself from what he was leaving behind and what he knew was about to happen. Behind him, Katie's mournful howl echoed through the woods. He fell to his knees, overcome by grief, letting it take him for a time. Hours later, Malithar returned to the module. Mr. Persimmon had already wrapped his wife in a sheet and stood with 2 shovels leaning by the door. His expression was heavy with anger, not just at the world or the loss of his wife, but directed specifically at Malithar. "Where were you?" Mr. Persimmon demanded. Malithar blinked in surprise, unaccustomed to harsh words from the human. Mr. Persimmon cut him off with a sharp wave and pointed toward Artie. The Night Fang was curled around Katie at the foot of the bed, where Mrs. Persimmon's body lay. "You left your damn companion here, alone and afraid, in a room with death." He stepped closer, glaring up at the alien. "This creature, who has only known you as its sole guardian and parent since nearly the day it was born, was frantic, calling and clawing at the door for you." Malithar glanced over, seeing fresh gouges in the metal frame, before his attention was snapped back by Mr. Persimmon, jabbing a finger beneath his slitted nose. Promise me you will never, ever leave a pet alone with death, ever again. Process your grief however you damn well need to, but make sure you are there for them. Understood? Wordlessly, Malithar nodded. Mr. Persimmon seemed satisfied and stepped back, thrusting the shovel toward him. Here, help me dig a plot for Delilah. No sense in waiting until the weather gets worse. Malithar the Unflinching was a little less brash and a little less swift as he followed Artie's signs of concern. Where is she, boy? Find her! He trailed behind the Night Fang, who loped through the dense foliage, stopping occasionally to sniff and paw at the ground. Katie had gone out earlier but hadn't returned, and both he and Mr. Persimmon were growing worried. She had slowed over the past year, her steps less steady. Recently, she had stumbled and fallen on trails she once navigated with ease. Suddenly, Malithar spotted what at first seemed to be a pile of leaves. It shivered and whined as Artie nuzzled it, careful not to poke the dog with his large front fangs. Carefully, Malithar scooped Katie into his arms. Despite his strength, she still felt impossibly light, her body growing gaunt in the years following Mrs. Persimmon's passing. Carefully cradling Katie, Malithar ran back toward the habitation module. He spotted Mr. Persimmon on the porch, anxiously, wringing his hands. They hurried inside, and Mr. Persimmon grabbed a towel to dry Katie's soaked fur. Artie scurried to the corner they shared, pulling out a small, squeaky toy shaped like a carnivore the Persimmons had called a bear. He brought it over, resting it beside Katie's head, then nudged it closer to her. Katie looked at the toy, then slowly lifted her head. She gave a long, tired glance at both Mr. Persimmon and Malithar before gently taking the toy in her mouth and biting it enough to emit a single quiet squeak. The sound caused Artie to let out an excited shriek, bounding in a circle around them before settling behind Mr. Persimmon. Katie rested on Mr. Persimmon's lap as Artie curled up close. The room fell silent, save for Katie's labored panting, the sound of their breathing, and Artie's occasional whines of concern. After a long moment, Mr. Persimmon blinked away tears and muttered hoarsely, Damn it, Delilah! I told her this was a bad idea. I told her. Malithar tilted his head in confusion. What do you mean? From the start, Mr. Persimmon replied. I told her we were too old to be getting a new dog. His voice cracked. I told her this would be the last one. I can't do this again. Malithar nodded solemnly. But by God, I wish I could, Mr. Persimmon continued, his voice heavy with grief. But I'm too old. My bones are tired. It's too late now, anyhow. His voice softened to a near whisper, one Malithar suspected he wasn't meant to hear. If I lose Katie, Katie's the last part of her I have left. I can't lose her too. Katie must have recognized her name. She lifted her head weakly, licking Mr. Persimmon's hand a couple of times. He scowled and smiled, rubbing the back of his hand over his eyes as he gently scolded, Hush now. Stay still, girl. You'll be okay. You'll be okay. Katie convulsed in his arms, a pained whine escaping her, mirrored by an echoed shriek of distress from Artie. Mr. Persimmon's voice turned hoarse. Malithar, he said, struggling to keep steady, go get the medical kit. Find the vial marked morphine and fill a syringe for me, would you? Malithar nodded, but he paused as he was not familiar with the amount they had used before when the humans or dog had been injured. What dosage should I prepare to ease her pain? Mr. Persimmon looked up, meeting Malithar's gaze with red, wet eyes. His voice broke as he replied, Just fill the damn syringe, please. Without hesitation, Malithar stood and strode to the cabinet. He rifled through the medical pouch until he found the bottle Mr. Persimmon had requested. He quickly drew the morphine into the syringe, filling it until the bottle was nearly empty. He tapped the side to clear the air bubbles, just as he had seen Mrs. Persimmon do many times before. But as he turned back, the atmosphere in the room shifted. A soft, broken sigh escaped Mr. Persimmon, and Artie let out a low, mournful whine. Malithar came around the corner and looked at Katie, who was breathing out, but her chest did not move again to breathe in, and she went still. Go on, girl, Mr. Persimmon whispered. She left the gate open for us. Go give my flower a kiss and play with Abigail for me. Tell them all how much I miss them. I'll see you all soon." Malathar stood silently, placing a hand gently on Mr. Persimmon's shoulder. The man reached up, patting it with trembling fingers. Artie approached Katie, nuzzling her still head before walking over to Malathar, rubbing against his legs. Malathar crouched and scratched the Nightfang's head, feeling the vibrations of its purring whine beneath his hand. Mr. Persimmon watched the interaction, then reached out to pet Artie as well. He barely flinched when a sudden twist of Artie's head jabbed his hand. Lowering his gaze, he resumed stroking Katie's quiet form. With a rueful smile, he looked at the syringe in Malathar's hand and shrugged. "She always did like doing things her way," he said, blinking through tears. Malathar the Unflinching was a little less brash and a little less swift as he folded his ceremonial robes. Together, they had buried Katie in a patch of native flowers, right beside where Mrs. Persimmon was interred. The habitation module was nearly empty now, its contents packed away, save for the small trinkets and keepsakes left around the two graves. "They'll have more use for it than I do," Mr. Persimmon had said about the possessions they left behind. As they prepared to leave, Malathar turned to Mr. Persimmon. "Where are you off to next?" he asked. With a shrug, the human said, "Don't know. Don't really care, to be honest. I just feel like I need to wander until my legs can't carry me anymore." His gaze lifted to meet Malathar's. "Don't get old, son. Everything around you dies." He reached for the locket that had hung around his neck for as long as Malathar had known him. Opening it, he revealed its contents to Malathar for the first time. 3 locks of hair. One was a gray curl from Mrs. Persimmon. Another, black and brown, belonged to Katie. The third were delicate, tiny silken curls from someone Malathar had never met. Holding the locket reverently, Mr. Persimmon said softly, "I'll need to find a good spot to spread them. Somewhere with a view of something other than just trees," he said, smiling as they both looked around at the beauty of the rain blossoms that were blooming all along the trunks of the trees nearby. He smiled faintly. Delilah was always the botanist. Coming here was her idea in the first place. Malathar nodded as Artie whined, nudging his hand for attention. He bent over to grab and throw a stick for Artie to fetch, and the Nightfang let out a screech of delight as it bounded forward after the branch. "It's amazing how they can move on from grief so easily," Malathar said, watching the Nightfang leap joyfully in the light morning rain. Mr. Persimmon reached up and patted Malathar's arm gently. "That's what I've been telling you. All along, son. Keeping pets truly is the easy part." Malathar the Unflinching was a little less brash and a little less swift these days, but his patience had grown immeasurably. He sat at a spaceport he'd already forgotten the name of, nursing a drink. Nearby, loud laughter and the sound of boastful arguments caught his attention. "I'm telling you, humans are overrated," one voice bellowed. "They can't even lift half a ton. They go down just like anyone else to a laser bolt. Sure, they might run a while, but they're unarmored, fleshy, pink, and it took them centuries to even stop killing themselves before they figured out space travel." Malathar's grip on his metal cup tightened, the faint sound of crinkling metal betraying his growing irritation. He took a slow breath, calming himself in a way he'd never have managed years ago. Rising to his feet, he stepped over to the table. The trio fell quiet as he approached, but the most vocal of the group snorted, laughing and pointing a long clawed finger. "Oh, you've got something to say, old-timer?" Malathar's fist came down hard on the table, silencing the remaining chuckles. "You have no idea," he said evenly, meeting the speaker's eyes. "What's that supposed to mean?" one of the others asked, glancing nervously at Malathar's towering frame. "You're right," Malathar said, his voice calm but carrying an edge. "Humans aren't the strongest or the fastest or even the toughest." The 3 he was speaking to appeared taken aback by his agreement. "Wait, what? So humans aren't special?" He gestured toward the bustling spaceport outside the bar. A young, red-haired human walked by with a winged serpent coiled around his shoulders. The man laughed, feeding the creature a piece of meat while affectionately scratching under its chin. "That," Malithar said, pointing at the scene, "is what makes humans special. It's not their strength or speed, it's their connection to their companions. A species so weak they need to rely on other species to obey them?" One of the trio sneered. "Doesn't seem that special, and it definitely doesn't seem that hard to raise a critter and have it follow you around." Malithar chuckled darkly, his laughter carrying a bitter edge that silenced the group. He reached under his tunic and pulled out a chain he always wore. Hanging from it was a single, long, curled nightfang tooth, its edges worn smooth from years of being carried close to his chest. "That's the thing you don't understand," Malithar said, his voice tight, with memories. "Keeping a pet is easy, but letting them go? That's the hard part. Enjoy another amazing story." "Yes, sir." "Understood, sir. I'll let them know." Agent Dryers couldn't help but let an annoyed sigh escape. The authority on the other end must have noticed and said something else too, which Dryers replied, "Yes, sir. I know it was out of our hands, both for the hearing and any additional materials or follow-up." He paused, listening to the other voice. "I don't think they'll be thrilled, but they'll probably take it in stride like they've done with the other setbacks." A pause. "Yes, sir. We'll be ready if anything changes." "Yep, you have a good weekend too." Then he ended the call, this time, letting out a much more forceful sigh as he rubbed his temples. Their department was certainly not the one in charge of determining when information about their visitors became public knowledge, but Dryers couldn't help but feel cynical in his private opinion about the poor handling of it all. They had been through this song and dance just a few years earlier, with a soft launch using the Air Force dossiers to confirm the existence of UFOs. It was something that should have made front-page headlines for weeks, or, at the very least, a single news cycle. But now it was relegated to a sidebar of physical newspapers and digested into brief, flavorless summaries interspersed with video snippets of the hearings online. Their team wasn't an especially large one anymore, as their visitors were surprisingly low maintenance. Dryers was one of only half a dozen tasked full-time with monitoring them and attending to their needs. He was also the only one on site, a fact he was painfully reminded of as he stepped out of his office. The somewhat cramped rooms and cubicles in the office space that had been set aside were thoroughly mothballed, all electronics and personal effects from those who once excitedly worked alongside him having been removed decades ago. Agent Dryers could feel the weight of memories pressing down on him for a moment. His throat felt stiff and a tear formed at the wrinkles at the side of his eye as he remembered how excited they'd been when they were young, when the visitors had first arrived, first made contact, first been established. The office had been filled with notes and images, discussions and jokes, and discovery after discovery as they managed to open communications and then actual visitations with their off-world guests. But that was then, and this was now. He still met up with the old crew on occasion for drinks and billiards when he was shoreside, but that was a fairly scarce opportunity. It had been more frequent before his wife Glenda had passed. Now that she had been gone 3 years, he rarely came to shore except for resupplies and the department-wide holiday dinner. He shrugged on a heavy coat and waterproof pants before exiting the office space and stepping out onto the deck of the rig. The office was a semi-converted space atop a functional oil platform, one that was a low enough producer that any self-respecting fuel company would have shuttered it years ago, though it produced enough to at least provide a reasonable story. If other nations suspected why the rig had truly been established and what really lay beneath, there had been no sign of it to their department. Still, Dryers was careful to ensure that the heavy rain jacket and pants he wore covered his suit and tie, just to keep up appearances. He waved greetings to a few of the rig workers he recognized as he walked past and saw yet more faces he did not recognize. This was fairly typical. While he was occasionally invited to a group dinner or to play a few hands of poker, Dryers had never been an especially personable man and tended to shy away from such gatherings instinctively. He reached the chamber with the diving bell. Eager to be out of the heavy coat, he carefully doffed it and hung it on a waiting rack by the door. The diving bell chamber had 2 entrances. This one was labeled from the outside as a maintenance panel access and was generally ignored by the rest of the crew, allowing him to store what effects he needed within for his duties. He gathered a small briefcase of effects and quickly freshened up to make sure he was presentable as the representative of the United States and humanity at large. As he checked his teeth in the mirror, his eyes fell upon his service pistol sitting on the side of the sink, still in its shoulder holster, with a light film of dust on top. While technically required issue every time he went down, Dryers had found it wholly unnecessary, in his opinion, and likely to raise questions that need not be answered. He had purposefully neglected to bring it with him ever since. Stepping into the diving bell, he secured the latches, checking to ensure the indicator light confirmed good seals. He took a key from the lanyard in his pocket, inserting it into the fire and emergency crew contact slot. He cranked it past off, past on, past call, and to an unmarked fourth position before pressing the descend button. There was a familiar lurch, his stomach rising into his throat for a moment as it always did when the diving bell hurtled downwards. There was a rough thump as it met the water, but nothing beyond that. The descent was otherwise smooth. He noticed his ears popping slightly, a somewhat concerning indication of the diving bell's age and its inability to fully keep out the crushing pressure all around. Still, the bell continued downward, past the maintenance points on the rig and the drill shaft as well. It traveled for nearly another mile before slowing and coming to a stop. Peering out the porthole, he was pleased to see that, as always, despite the crushing darkness around him, there was a softly lit tunnel marked by pulsing glows leading out from the diving bell's sealed bulkhead door. He cranked the bulkhead loose, pushing the hatch open and being buffeted by a puff of warm air. To his surprise, the air was scented to a cloying and nauseating level of vanilla. No doubt they had been baking again. He would have to confirm with them that the ingredients they were using were the proper admixtures. From the smell of it, they had substituting the quantity of vanilla called for in a recipe with the exact weight of pure vanillin compound, synthesized using their own equipment, instead of the normal amount diluted in a carrier liquid. It wasn't the first time they had made that type of mistake. While fortunately nothing had been dangerous as a result of their attempts to make human food, it was almost always wholly unappetizing, and he had to put on his best face to pretend it was acceptable, if not necessarily delightful. He stepped down the softly lit hall, marveling again at the transparent view above. It was all pitch black, of course, but occasionally there'd be a flicker of reflected light as a small fish or squid darted past. In some cases, he had even seen one bump directly into the tunnel and stun itself for a few seconds before swimming away. Stepping up to the open hatchway, he rapped on the side of the metal door with his knuckles, calling, "Hello? Anybody home?" From within came the sing-song voices he had come to know so well. "Agent Dryers, please come in. We welcome you into our home." The latter expression was still somewhat stiff and formal, as the aliens were doing their best to mimic human phrasing. Even after all these decades, they still hadn't quite gotten the hang of inflection. He stepped in, ducking low to avoid hitting his head on the curved ceiling. The overall size of the ship was fairly small, perhaps comparable to a 2- or 3-bedroom house, but the living quarters here were scarcely larger than a studio apartment. The two aliens approached to greet him, and Agent Dryers felt his heart clench in sympathy for them. They resembled the traditional Roswell alien description, albeit with hexagonal compound eyes set higher on their heads, resembling those of a dragonfly. Their arms split at the elbow into a pair of hands and forelimbs. Both were wearing baggy t-shirts that read, "Welcome Humanity," and they beamed as they noticed him. "What do you think? We had these delivered in secret," they said, smiling and giving a quick hand covering the eye gesture, their way of mimicking a wink since they had no eyelids. Agent Dryers chuckled, smiling sadly. "They do look nice, all right." The shirts weren't a surprise, though the aliens had tried to request them discreetly through the medical team. The doctor had appropriately informed Dryers about the unusual order for silkscreen t-shirts, prompting him to review it just in case. "So, what's the news? Are humans excited to learn that we are here? What did they think? Are they coming soon?" He smiled, steeling himself. "I'm afraid that the reception has been less than enthusiastic." The broad smile on the alien's face faltered slightly. "What do you mean?" "Well, we held the hearing and told them that you aliens are indeed here, and that you're under the ocean." "Excellent. Are there camera crews arriving soon then? What questions do they have for us? Are we to meet the president now? They craned to look behind him, as if expecting there to be a silent crowd just out of sight. Agent Dryers shook his head. Unfortunately, it seems people still don't believe you exist. But wasn't that the point of having the hearing? One of them asked. Their smiles began to droop. Agent Dryers nodded. Over the years, there had been some attempts to name the creatures, but their personalities appeared almost identical, and genetically they were entirely identical. Their species didn't use personal nouns like names, and had instead requested to be referred to collectively. He shrugged. Yeah, they did, but people just don't believe them. Surely they showed them the pictures we have taken? The alien thrust a disposable camera toward Agent Dryers. We have taken many more. We hope they will be informative and useful for the humans who wish to learn about us. Dryers nodded, clearing his throat awkwardly. Yes, I'll make sure to pass that along. But no, they didn't include images this time either. There had already been hundreds of images captured for the hearing, but none had been presented, much to his grave disappointment. Poor or altogether missing visuals had been one of the reasons the initial UFO hearing had been received so poorly, and he was already seeing and hearing that the reaction was much the same even to the confirmation presented in the most recent hearing. We believe these will be of great use to the humans. It even shows us making these. The alien held out a tray of cookies still cooling, reeking of vanilla so strongly that Agent Dryer's eyes started to water. Those look great, he said hesitantly. The aliens beamed. Yes, we are excited for you to try them once they are cool enough to be safe to consume. He grinned and gave a thumbs up, his stomach already doing flips at the thought. He took the offered disposable camera, tucking it into his jacket, knowing it would end up next to the other dozen filled cameras still sitting in his office desk drawer. The cost of developing traditional film had become a significant problem. It had been decided early on that giving the aliens a digital camera might pose too great a technological risk, so they were supplied only with disposable ones. However, developing the film had turned into a logistical nightmare over the past decade, as most government-secure development facilities had been shuttered one by one. Theoretically, there was a site in Kansas that was still operational, but its backlog, primarily old U-2 surveillance footage, stretched for miles. As a result, the disposables had been relegated to a maybe sometime next year ETA. We had been so hopeful to meet you all, said one alien, coming up to hug Agent Dryers before he could politely but firmly request they refrain from doing so. As the alien sniffled and broke the embrace, Dryers withheld a groan of frustration at seeing the imprint of the alien sweat along his suit coat and pants. Their species didn't cry, but still had biological processes to flush stress chemicals, resulting in a form of sweat-like paste exuding from all over their head. It wasn't the hug he minded so much as the dry cleaning it always required, and the hefty bribe to the laundromat to not question why such harsh chemicals were needed to fully remove the stain. The other aliens stood by themselves, but hung their head as they said, "Do humans not even wish to meet us?" I thought. They trailed off, and Agent Dryers could see them cradling a small green alien head pencil and a razor, one of their prized possessions from a gift exchange last holiday season. Of course they do. This was said genuinely, although he typically refrained from specifying exactly what the full range of reasons were for why humans sought to meet aliens. The despondent alien looked up, taking a shuddering breath. You really mean it? He nodded. Yep. Perhaps next time, he said with a small smile, patting them on a sweat-free shoulder congenially. You could even bake some of your cookies for them when the news crews do eventually come. This seemed to brighten their spirits, and they eagerly nodded, saying, Indeed, we can show our skills in baking human confections, and perhaps even make them. The alien paused for dramatic effect, making contact with their companion as the voice pitched up in excitement, and they said in unison, A pancake breakfast! Agent Dryer's eyes went wide, and he nodded vigorously, trying and failing to banish from his mind the memory of the panic they'd had when the smoke warning sensors had gone crazy a few years back, and they had come down to find charred lumps nearly glued to cooking pans courtesy of using pure starch instead of flour, and the aliens beaming and soot-covered. He had to choke down 2 whole pancake briquettes, topped complete with what that tasted to be pure corn syrup, before their attention had turned to other things. "Well," the alien said, pulling up a chair for him to sit gingerly in as he forced his stomach to settle. "We are excited for you to tell us more about the recent activities of your surface world. We have been reading enthusiastically and have learned many more things about your people," they added, holding up an Encyclopedia Britannica that looked to be from the mid-2000s. "Your culture continues to fascinate us, and we are excited to eventually meet others of your species. But tell us, what has changed since we last saw you? We are enthusiastic about the chance to speak with your Madam President." Agent Dryers gritted his teeth, remembering his last visit had been shortly before Halloween. The aliens had gladly shown him their haphazard costumes, crafted from a mixture of seafloor debris and alien substances. The resulting creations were nauseating approximations of a tiger and what he supposed was meant to be a princess of some sort. He took a long, deep breath, putting on his best smile. "Actually," he said, "there's been a bit of a development about that." Next, amazing Stroy. To say the initial contact from aliens was shocking would be an understatement of untold proportions. The initial communications made by the Taurians, so nicknamed by amateur astronomers who observed the torus shape of their ships, were credited with forestalling at least 2 armed conflicts about to bubble over in southeastern Europe and northern Africa. They also sparked a temporary unspoken ceasefire in the rapidly escalating skirmishes between the United States and Chinese navies in the South China Sea. However, the aliens' language was complex and nuanced, being highly subjective and context-dependent. Even after weeks of work, linguists and codebreakers were only able to make confident guesses at their meaning. Fortunately, their messages seemed to convey goodwill and cooperation, with positive inflections. Their language was much more precise when discussing mathematical constants. Thus, when they shared the coordinates of what appeared to be their mother system, we were surprised to learn it was a mere dozen light-years away, practically neighbors, in the context of the greater galactic expanse. Yet one area of confusion remained. The Taurians expressed an eager desire to speak with Earth's greatest, apparently assuming our fractured species had a single representative body or figurehead. We attempted to communicate that no such individual existed. However, due to either our poor grasp of their language or their equally tenuous understanding of our communication methods, a complex beamed ratio of atomic decays corresponding to specific isotopes, it was unclear if they understood. The Taurians just continued to insist on speaking with Earth's greatest. Scholars and translators were remarkably consistent in this interpretation, although they admitted room for error. When news of this exact request leaked, it spread like wildfire across the planet, sparking massive protests and heated debates. Presidents of the United States, China, and India argued fiercely over which nation could claim the title of greatest based on population, wealth, or influence. The arguments seemed destined to spark conflicts of their own, with numerous reports of clashes between protesters and counter-demonstrators, some in favor of and others against alien visitation. However, the Taurians broke the stalemate with a genial announcement. They would visit Earth to speak more with its greatest, and looked forward to doing so soon. The key word, more, was also polarizing. Translators confirmed its accuracy, fueling speculation that prior discussions with other nations had occurred. This sparked a new wave of accusations, with each country convinced others had secretly communicated with the aliens to form alliances behind their back, while publicly lying about their ignorance. Despite these tensions, the world waited with bated breath for the Taurians' arrival as they began to descend. Their descent was gradual and excruciatingly slow. The aliens apparently had no form or need for heat shielding. Many engineers suggested the slow pace was a method to ensure their ship could avoid damage during rapid descent, where human spacecraft would typically use ablative shielding. Still, the slow descent meant finding the approximate area of the landing was relatively trivial. News that it was headed toward North America and somewhere within the continental United States was quickly met with despair and suspicion from Indian and Chinese news outlets, and elation and speculation from American outlets about what backroom deals the president might have garnered during secret discussions with the aliens. But then the American channels began to express confusion and concern. During the final hours of the descent, it became clear the destination was not Washington, D.C., New York, or the greater Los Angeles megacity. Instead, it was headed toward Utah, which sparked an entirely new set of debates and celebrations, this time many along religious lines. Some wondered if this was a divine gift for the Mormons, with several parish leaders calling for their followers to celebrate the arrival of what might be another lost tribe. Others were simply elated about the newfound influence their city and state leaders might soon wield thanks to such prestigious guests. Even these celebrations were soon riddled with uncertainty as the final landing place became clear. A desolate area of the central Utah wilderness. When the ship touched down and the Taurians first emerged, 7 creatures that appeared to resemble sea urchins of vibrant hues. However, they simply rolled past the assembled scientists, soldiers, and journalists, who tried to communicate or even threaten them. The aliens simply moved on, unperturbed, and reached the aspen grove. One of the creatures extended a pseudopod and touched the bark of a tree. Together, the septet of aliens began to hum, a sound droning alternately between harmony and dissonance. For nearly an hour, the sound continued, until it abruptly stopped. The creatures then rolled back, carefully avoiding the few foolhardy soldiers who tried to block their path, and returned to their craft. Before the Taurians took off, one final message was translated. "We have spoken with your greatest. They have raised concerns about whether your species is best suited as caretakers of this planet, and have asked that we return at a later date, that we may again assess whether your kind is ready for the gifts of knowledge we would bring. Farewell." Aliens left, departing as slowly as they had arrived. Now the discussion pivoted to botanists, arborists, and the Pando forest the aliens had spoken with. In what became a widely quoted remark in the years to follow, a local wildlife ranger who had worked in the Pando Reserve for more than a decade said that she couldn't quite explain it, but felt like the forest was feeling smug about itself. Thanks for diving into this story with me. Don't miss out on the next one. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a big thumbs up, and drop a comment below with your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you think.